Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching India's World with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Bordered by the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, India is the second most populous country and the biggest democracy in the world. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund recognize India as the sixth largest economy on the planet. India's dynamic foreign policy and the willingness of countries to forge a close partnership with New Delhi as an upcoming global power pose a serious challenge to a world order in which the US, Russia, China and the EU are competing for dominance. On this edition of India's World, we will look back at India's foreign policy in 2018 and what to expect in 2019. Joining me on the program today are KP Nair, Strategic Analyst, Sreeram Chaulia, Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, and Shashank, former Foreign Secretary. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Professor Sreeram Chaulia, like Mr. KP Nair pointed out in the beginning itself, there are several sticking points really as far as some neighbors were concerned, be it, Pakistan, be it China in the beginning of the year after what happened in Doklam in 2017. We had the Wuhan summit as well, and there were several other aspects that took place really in 2018. How did we address some of these major problems?
I think, Frank, this year, 2018, we did a big strategic readjustment. The initial years of the Modi administration, we were quite clear about China posing a strategic challenge and a competition, and we did look up to the United States to a great extent to be able to assist us in creating a more balanced Indo-Pacific region. But I think what has happened is we have done a bit of a reality check with Donald Trump this year, and we have moved away from dependence on the US as unlike in the previous years, realizing that one, Trump doesn't have any kind of long-term strategic vision, and two, he is not necessarily interested in propping up India as a counterweight to China. So in that kind of environment, we continued with the US in many ways. We had 2+2 dialogue, very important milestone for the first time this year. We also had on the sidelines of G20 the J, as Prime Minister Modi called it, Japan, America, India trilateral. But on the other hand, we have been hedging also. Then Wuhan summit you mentioned is very important. I think it was like the landmark diplomatic event of 2018 when our Prime Minister and the Chinese President did an informal walk around and sit down and powwow, and it was very important to rebuild the confidence after the Doklam incident of 2017. So, and we have continuously done this, behind the scenes, the mechanisms are working. There have been no fresh, incidents across the line of actual control. So great power relations, and likewise, even with Russia, we have made sure that, you mentioned that, Ms. Nair was saying there's a fear that Russia was being neglected, but this year, the summit, we were very clear, we are going to buy the S-400 anti-missile system, no matter what the Trump administration's pressure is. So in a way, we asserted ourselves and readjusted to the Trump factor in a big way.
Right.
And I think we have shown, I mean, this is not non-alignment. I think that era is over. But what we are saying is that, we want India to become a great power in its own right. And for that, it needs to show this flexibility and continuous adaptation to the global environment. And that, I think, we have done quite successfully this year. And even with the neighbors, I think Maldives, we were worried about the continuation of a dictatorship there, but we got a result in our favor. Sri Lanka, there was a fear of Mahinda Rajapaksa making a comeback and whether we will adjust, but ultimately that threat has receded, at least for now. And likewise, in Bangladesh, we expect, continuity. So all these things mean that overall, we are in a relatively secure position with no major threats to our global interests and to our regional interests. And I will give credit to Narendra Modi because what he did was to show that he is not pro-American. There was all this allegation from the left within the country that somehow he's pro-Western or he's putting all his eggs in the basket. This year he has shown the flexibility and the adaptation to be able to readjust away. If the United States is imposing trade and tariffs on us and imposing trade war on us, we are up for it. We will challenge it. If the United States is not interested in helping us rise, we will look for alternatives and diversify. I think that's the big message we have sent.
Professor Chaulia, Afghanistan, now let's focus a little bit on Afghanistan because Afghanistan is extremely important as well. After, a policy of not engaging with the Taliban, we seem to have had non-official talks, with the Taliban as well. So Afghanistan is going to be important too.
Well, I think this was a year when the Afghan state, our ally, lost a lot of ground, and it is a matter of grave concern for us in India that the Afghan National Army has not been able to hold on to territory, and there are governance issues there, and the Taliban is on the rampage, and there's also the ISIS factor, which is from time to time causing sensational attacks on civilians. The degree of violence and the loss of Afghan troops. Ashraf Ghani, the Afghan president, revealed that in the last 2.5 to 3 years, the official count, they lost 28,000 or more forces. So on average, just calculate the kill rate. It is tremendous, and I think the American withdrawal, Trump's, plan to withdraw and cut down American presence in Afghanistan, which came towards the end of the year. All these are warning signs for us. In a way, we have stuck to Iran and the Chabahar, which is important for stabilizing Afghanistan. We opened new routes, and there are all kinds of flights happening, wheat shipments happening between Afghanistan and India through Chabahar. We are doing a lot, but the pure developmental diplomacy may not be sufficient in 2019 if the security situation worsens. And really, I think it will be a test for Modi administration as to how we can come up with a regional plan. We've been talking about the regional end game for a long time.
Right.
But now that the Americans are showing intent to isolate and to withdraw, more or less, if they are down to 7,000 troops, they cannot really shore up the Afghan state very much. So now we are talking about what can China, India and Russia, RIC, which we recently met in G20, what can we do for Afghanistan? Pakistan remains the main problem there, but nonetheless, what can the rest of the three of us do? Because if we cannot ride piggyback anymore on an isolationist US to shore up the flagging Afghan state.
Right.
And as far as the peace process goes, we are aware, we have been also called on numerous occasions. Zalmay Khalilzad, the US peace envoy, has been also keeping us informed. But I would say that direct talks between Taliban and Americans are okay. But what we will want to ensure is that our interests and the long sacrifice, the treasure and the blood that we have invested in that country cannot be summarily removed and neglected, and therefore we will need to fight for our interests there. At the same time, we have to keep the Afghan people's interests in the long term.
Absolutely,
and we want peace. We want peace. We want to be seen as not obstructing peace and saying that this is some kind of proxy war where influence is all that matters. But at the end of the day, Indian influence means peace in Afghanistan.
Right.
There is no contradiction between the two.
All right. Professor, what were the key factors that were limiting and also driving India's foreign policy in 2018?
I think one of the factors, Frank, is the foreign economic, diplomacy, and that, I think has really picked up pace. And I think that's one of the reasons we should be satisfied with the Modi government's performance this year, because you see the inward FDI has been $61 billion or more. It's a record and continues to be that way for the last 4 years. And every year, year on year, it's been an improvement. And secondly, our ease of doing business ranking of the World Bank has also again shot up by a large number of places. So if you take these two together, the message that of stability and security and that India is a good place where you can get return on investment has spread. And Prime Minister continues to indefatigably, go around the world and continue to woo and quote foreign investors in a big way. And I think that yields all these, outcomes, because end of the day, it is not a flash in the pan. We are not talking about only year one of Modi administration when this was going great. For 4 years, he has sustained it. Now, 5th year also, we are doing this. So I think it shows that on foreign economic diplomacy, especially with global CEOs, with sovereign wealth funds, all the wooing has worked. And now we are yielding the, benefiting from the yields of that. And you will see that in 2019, if growth projections for India, economic growth are high, it's not only because of domestic reasons, it's because the international community, especially the global holders of capital, are showing great level of confidence in India.
Right.
And I think when we go into 2019, we can say with our heads held high that, we have consistently shown that India is left behind a kind of a laggard kind of a image and is now leaping. And so there may be some questions about Make in India and domestic, labor regulations and those kind of things. But overall, if you see, the image we have projected has been positive and has been believed by the bulk of the international community consistently for 4.5 years.
Right.
And going into 5 years. And I think foreign economic diplomacy is one area we often neglect in assessing Modi administration, that is where he gets an A plus.
All right. Very quick closing comments from all my guests on, what to expect in the new year. Professor, close the show for us.
So while I said that we had readjusted to the Trump reality and had worked it out with the Chinese, I still believe that China remains the predominant source of insecurity for India geopolitically, and the Indo-Pacific is where a lot of work needs to be done in terms of formations, small group coalitions. It's not only with Japan, which of course is central to us, but also with ASEAN countries, specific ASEAN countries like Indonesia, Vietnam. We need to do a lot more, I think, to feel like we have warded off this shadow that is looming over our strategic space. We have to preserve our supremacy in the Indian Ocean and also maintain our relations in a manner where our influence is not going to be frittered away. So I think that's a long-term challenge for 2019. Throughout the year, we will face this constant issue of how do we manage the spreading Chinese influence, and how do we work it out with smaller partners in a way which is not seen as intruding on their sovereignty, but at the same time protecting our interests. It's a thin, it's a narrow tightrope act.
All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. Have a happy new year.